And so every month, we are going to be bringing in experts and community voices to break down the issues. And tonight is our first session, and we could not be more excited to kick this off with missing middle housing. Just a couple housekeeping items. We encourage engagement in the chat. So if you have questions, feel free to ask in the chat. I will be kind of referring to those questions when we get to the Q&A portion later. You can do so in the chat sort of icon, click on the chat icon at the bottom, and I believe there might be a Q&A button as well. And then finally, this is being recorded and will be posted after with the follow-up resources. So state of housing in Arizona. So why are we even talking about housing? Well, it's because the numbers are stark, right? So Arizona's cost of living is already higher than the national average. And since 2019, average home price has risen by more than $160,000, right? This is not a small number. And this is the difference really between being able to buy a home and then being priced out entirely. And then, of course, there's all those domino effects of that. And then in 2023 alone, the number of households in Arizona grew at nearly twice the rate of new homes being built. So we have this situation, right, where supply is increasing on the one hand, but it is just simply not keeping pace with demand, right? And that gap is what's pushing up prices. And so really here's the critical piece. The vast majority of what is being built is single family housing, right? This means that we are not building at the range of options or at the speed that people actually need. And so this really begs the question, what might we do about it? So what exactly is missing middle housing? So this term really describes housing types that sit between a single family home and a large apartment complex, where you have multiple homes in a single building, but at a scale that fits right into a residential neighborhood. And kind of looking at this diagram, think duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, courtyard buildings. I am a cheerleader for courtyard buildings. If you ever talk to me in person, these really like these are not new ideas, right? Older neighborhoods across Phoenix already have them. That's arguably what makes them livable, walkable, and beautiful. Really, the question is whether our zoning rules allow more of them to be built. And so, as you see kind of left to right, now we really only allow a handful of types of housing where you have like your single family homes, and then, your mid-rise sort of large apartment complexes, and then high-rise buildings in that, immediate downtown Phoenix area. And so within this sort of continuum or spectrum, if you will, like missing middle sits, in the lack of a better word, in the middle of that. And historically, it's exactly the type of housing that zoning codes have made it the hardest to build, or just outright illegal to build. And so kind of really getting at why missing middle housing like tends to be more affordable, right? It's not really by accident, it's by design. So first, units are smaller than a single family home. So you have your base costs, which are going to be lower. And second, when you have multiple units on one lot, the land costs get shared across those multiple households. And third, these are simpler low-rise structures. They do not require the same complex engineering as a high-rise or the logistical and financing challenges that come with sort of high-rises, large apartment complex buildings, and then single-family homes, right? Because you don't just build one home, a single-family home. To pencil that out, you build subdivisions. So, and really the benefits go beyond price points, right? This type of housing can also help bridge racial home ownership and wealth gaps, right? A small property owner can live in one unit and rent the others, building equity while generating rental income to stabilize their finances, for example. And it really diversifies who gets to participate in the housing industry, right? You have small scale projects open the door to small businesses and emerging developers who really just who cannot compete really in this environment with large developers, because large developers are really, they're not the only game in town, but they practically are when you really only have those like 2 or 3 types of housing types that can be built. Because, again, those single family subdivisions, large apartment blocks really can only be built and financed by these larger developers. So increasing options and increasing competition is really kind of the goal here in terms of how that can drive down prices and make it more affordable. So where does Arizona stand on policy? Kind of starting zoomed out real quick. So in 2024, the state legislature passed HB 2721. This was a significant step moving in the direction of towards housing progress, right? This law required the 15 largest cities in Arizona to allow middle housing on single-family residential lots within 1 mile of a central business district. And so some cities went further, right? Tucson and Flagstaff, shout out Tucson and Flagstaff. They expanded middle housing permissions citywide, and beyond that is really what the state required, which is awesome. Phoenix passed its ordinance in compliance with this state law, so only allowing middle housing within that 1 mile of a central business district. And then they brought in ASU to study that issue further. But for those of you who attended those council meetings on middle housing, you will know that it was contentious, to say the least, right? There were a lot of big feelings in the room. And rightfully so, right? Like this can feel like a really big change. We're trying to address structural issues. But, this kind of is really a good segue into thinking about addressing some of these concerns and big emotions that we're seeing, right? So what does the evidence actually say? So kind of kicking off with like a myth versus reality. So this first one is, myth, our neighborhoods will be overwhelmed, doubling the number of homes and impacting parking and infrastructure. So, the reality is a little bit more measured, right? Growth happens gradually through small scale additions, right? A duplex here, a triplex there, right? These are far less intensive than people might expect. Nobody's, just demolishing these, at a volume level and then trying to install like a large apartment complex. It's just not what we're seeing in the evidence. And, because these middle housing is designed to fit into existing residential blocks, they tend to use existing infrastructure more efficiently, not less. So, and then kind of moving into this sort of next one, sort of another concern that we hear is that, middle housing encourages demolition of homes, right? But the reality, again, is a little more different, right? So historic preservation protections remain fully enforced, right? New homes still have to comply with all existing preservation rules. That did not change. That was never in consideration for changing. And beyond the legal protections, the economic math really just like does not favor demolition. Historic homes are expensive to acquire, and demolition involves a long, costly, and heavily regulated process. And so for developers, that really just does not pencil out. Right. So especially on like the time horizon that developers, want to be able to get a return on, their investment and their investors' investments. So right now, as it stands and regarding this sort of myth, there is no pending request to demolish historic single-family homes in order to build multi-family housing in Phoenix. And so the next myth, the third myth, and maybe the most common, at least in conversations I have with folks, is that we cannot be sure that middle housing will actually lower prices, right? There's no guarantee. And we have some real world data on that. After Minneapolis eliminated family only zoning and legalized duplexes and triplexes, a 2025 study found that mid-tier home price growth was reduced by 15 to 23% compared to what prices otherwise would have been. And then in Portland, another good example, middle housing built after zoning reforms sold for substantially less than the traditional single detached homes. And as supply grew, we saw that average prices for those homes decrease, making them more affordable. And so more supply, particularly in the middle of the market, really does have a measurable downward pressure on prices. And we know that this is a very high demand market where supply just is not keeping up. And so, really what this tells us is that the question isn't really whether middle housing can make a difference. The evidence is real. The stakes are very clear. They're very felt by people every day. And the question now is really how we choose to implement it here, and what that means for our future. And so to really help us unpack that, I am excited to bring in a group of people who are working on these issues from different angles. So bringing in tonight's panelists, each of them comes at this issue from a different angle, whether that be policy, advocacy, or community organizing. And together they really kind of give us this sort of full look, a full picture, if you will, of where Phoenix is and where it needs to go. So first off, we have Andrea Luna-Cervantes from Organized Power in Action, or sorry, Organized Power in Numbers. She is heavily engaged in tenant organizing across Phoenix to combat high rent costs. We have Will Greene. He is a UPP board member, policy expert, and a lived experience as a tenant of middle housing. And then we have the Honorable Ana Hernandez, Phoenix Councilwoman for District 7. But before that, she was the co-sponsor of the Missing Middle Housing Bill when she was in the state legislature. Okay, so let's kind of get into first some prepared questions, and then we are going to open it up for a Q&A session. For the audience, again, just as a reminder, feel free to start thinking about your questions and or sending them in the chat while we start off with the prepared questions. Andrea, you're here, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm like trying to figure things out here with the screens. Thank you for being here. Let's start with you. I know you kind of have competing events and kind of might have to leave after this question, but thank you so much for being here. I think you really provide a unique perspective as an organizer. So if you could, what are you seeing on the ground? What are like kind of specifically like what are renters struggling with right now when it comes to housing choices and how middle housing can play a role in the solution?
No, thank you. And then thank you for the presentation too. I feel like this is really beneficial. And would love actually connect with you after to see how we can get this training for our members. It wasn't too into the weeds. So,
Absolutely.
but yeah, I'm the campaign manager with Organized Parent Numbers. I've been organizing with tenants across the valley for about almost 3 years now. And our work has really been focused on fighting evictions and really trying to build real protections for renters. Um, so we've pushed for a right to counsel and have helped the city move to actually begin an eviction legal services program and have been able to win a source of income discrimination ban. So people who are using Section 8 vouchers and government assistance aren't being turned away after waiting on these lists for like what feels like forever. And our organizing is really shaped by what our members are living through every day, and a lot of it um, is housing and the affordability. So, what I'm seeing on the ground with our members is, yeah, renters are dealing with a really deep affordability crisis and a lack of real options. Our members are working full time and sometimes two or more jobs just to make ends meet and still can't secure stable housing. And what we've seen, we see rents keep rising while wages just continue to stay flat and people aren't being paid, you know, what their labor is worth. And families are really forced into tough decisions just to stay housed. And right now in the valley, as you were explaining, a lot of the housing available does not match how people actually live. And so the system really pushes a narrow set of choices that just don't work for most of our people, our renters, and a large single family home is just so out of reach for many, and high cost apartments are just not any better. And we've dealt with this as we've organized with tenants, the junk fees that are attached to these luxury apartments, valet fees that are $25 and you can't get out of it when the trash is literally down the street, which is not a better option for our renters who, are really struggling to make ends meet. Um, and I think what comes to mind right now is one of our members who had shared their experience just moving from place to place to try to find something that they could afford. And at one point, they were sharing space with another family friend just to be able to make, rent work because they couldn't find anything close to their work. They wanted something stable, nothing, too luxurious, or like a large home, but there was really no options like that available. And they actually ended up moving to like Maricopa. So super far, at least for me. And when they work in the valley, and there wasn't any options available for them. And I feel like this is where middle housing can really play a role. So things like you mentioned duplexes, triplexes, and smaller kind of multi-unit homes can really create more options at different price points. And I think you touched on it a little bit. It's important to say that, not all smaller housing is automatically affordable, but really expanding this kind of housing can help really close the gap and give people a chance to stay in their communities instead of being pushed out. And I feel like this is really about the stability and making sure that people have real choices that fit their lives, instead of being pushed out and just, completely destabilizing their lives and their communities in which they live in. Um, but that's just some of my experience, organizing here tenants in Valley, and what we've seen so far.
Awesome, thank you. And kind of just to speak on that and kind of to go to the next question, I can only also imagine, um, with that affordability in the living and also talk about sort of the labor element of that as well, just the high cost, the emotional toll it takes to have to always be thinking about this scarcity, insecurity, and even when you have to resort to living situations that you may not prefer, right? And why housing is so important. I think you really highlighted it, like how important that is and central to our mission, right? It shouldn't just be evidence-based approaches, but also joining that with the lived experiences of others. So thank you so much. Next, Will, we can get to you. Kind of want to zoom in a little bit on Phoenix and middle housing, specifically, like what is the status of missing middle implementation in the Valley, and like what barriers are coming up that you're seeing?
Yeah, happy to get to that. Thanks for having me, Stephen. It's definitely an honor to be on a panel with housing champions, Councilwoman Hernandez, who's been so instrumental to this, and Andrea with Open and the great work you all are doing. And I have to give a shout out for Senator Ortiz, of course, as well. Such a champion in Arizona. But yeah, I'd say this topic is really personal for me. I was kind of going through just the last like 15 years for me. The amount of middle housing typology that I've actually lived in. So I've lived in a fiveplex. This was in a different city in Omaha, Nebraska. I've lived in a multi-unit co-living historic home in Seattle. I've lived in it was a five-story historic townhome in DC, summer in DC. And then when I moved back to Arizona, I was really lucky to find in 2021 really lucky to find a duplex or backyard casita that a retired teacher rents out in the Coronado neighborhood in Phoenix. And so, and actually, and I also lived in a cottage cluster, Stephen, too, a cottage court in Arcadia, too, actually, after I graduated from ASU. So, middle housing has had such a positive impact on my life, and finding, affordability and kind of able as a young person to get my footing financially and also live in places where I could be car light or car free. And actually, didn't realize this until very recently. My family's origin story, starts from middle housing. So my parents started in a backyard cottage up in Seattle area, and so really so positively impactful for me. So I think when we think about missing middle housing, it's really all these structures that I lived in, were built many decades in the past. And so really what we're missing is the last 2 to 3 decades of construction of middle housing that didn't occur because cities have kind of systematically banned them. They made them legally unlawful to build in the vast majority of our cities, through exclusionary zoning. And so, I'm extremely grateful to the city leaders from many, many decades ago that allowed for, those buildings to be built. And, probably in some cases zoning didn't even exist in those cities at that time. But a millennial in 2018, benefited tremendously from them. So, I think about, unfortunately, the kind of the harm, that we're causing, whoever, the kid, 30 years from now, that they would benefit from the affordable fourplex, that we should have built 5 years ago in Phoenix. But we're all here today to make that change happen. And yeah, so as far as like how things are going, you mentioned some of the kind of breakthrough legislation that that Councilwoman Hernandez and Senator Ortiz and others, got through and through the legislature. And I'd say in my kind of definition of middle housing, I kind of include casitas and cottages. It's really a duplex or 2 units on a lot, just a detached duplex, but you have attached ADUs as well, of course. So HB 2720, the casita bill from 2024, that allowed cities above 75,000 population, allowed for ADUs, accessory dwelling units, or casitas up to three, on a single lot. That I think that bill is going to be extremely impactful. I think we're going to look back and kind of look to that bill as one that kind of stands above everything that's been done, and of course, hopefully, we can top it with future wins. But we've seen these things take some time because an industry is getting stood up, and so in other places that have legalized accessory dwelling units or casitas, the real kind of scale happens a few years kind of after the law, comes into play, and so places like I'll mention California is one that just the numbers are astounding. I think it's I saw a 15,000% increase in ADU construction after they legalized accessory dwelling units. But that took some time. On my bike ride to work, there's a little handwritten sign that says "We build ADUs. Call us with the phone number." And so I think there's an industry that's like just kind of getting realizing, okay, these are now legalized in Arizona, and that's kind of getting its act together, but extremely bullish on ADUs, not just not as a niche solution, but really thousands and thousands of units that are going to be coming.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. Next to Councilwoman Hernandez, you were, as I had said, a sponsor of the state middle housing bill when you were serving in the state legislature. Now you are at the city level, thankfully, in my personal opinion. Sorry, a little biased. I'm curious, kind of within your own framework, how you think about this, right? How can city policy support more of these housing choices?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Stephen, for having me. Yeah, I was a co-sponsor on 2721 and the lead negotiator on 2720 on the statewide ADU bill. So these are the type of middle housing bills we need. And yes, also shout out to Senator Ortiz because she was super instrumental in holding down in the House while I held it down in the Senate when we ran these bills. But to answer your question, well, first I have a question, can I curse on this webinar or should I not curse on this webinar?
It's recorded, so I guess whatever you're comfortable with, I'm also comfortable with.
Okay, cool. Because really what the city needs to do is we need to unfuck our zoning code, right? That's what it boils down to. There's so much that the cities can do, not just the city of Phoenix, but really all of the cities. Historically, cities are the driving force on zoning changes, and I really appreciate Will's mentioning of exclusionary zoning. And really, this is a harmful thing that we are doing through policy to our future generations, right? This is harm that we are actively causing by continuing to uphold exclusionary zoning practices that have, over the decades, made it illegal to build all kinds of different housing. So we got to a place where we typically build either apartments or big, large, sprawling homes that working people members and tenants from Open cannot afford, right? And so many of us, I was reading the comments, and I think there's a younger person here that's saving towards their first home. And when you only have these two options, that becomes impossible, right? The average age for a new homeowner now is 40 years old, and the average price for a home in the greater Phoenix area is $450,000 or $500,000 now, right? So it's we need to get back to these middle housing options. And so how we can get there is the city, we can take the initiative to look at our entire process from permitting to getting from the entire permitting process. How can we streamline that? How can we pull back arbitrary rules that have landed on the books over the years that make it really hard for more of these smaller scale developments to happen, right? And I think this is also a way where not only if we truly put our energy into changing our local zoning code, um, we open up a path for more local ownership of residents, right? Like we can have our people stay in our communities, live close to their families. We can let smaller local developers, right, also be the ones that are building our communities. So why not get to a point where we have community members actually building the communities that they're from? And so it's like when we have a path to do that, through this smaller scale development of middle housing, that brings a whole new set of benefits. So, right, so those are a few things we can do. Like we can look at our codes, we can change streamline the process, making sure that we're removing these arbitrary barriers in the entire planning process, making sure we're reducing the cost so that more projects can pencil out at a lower amount, so that these are actually attainable to our working class folks and to really at any income level you're at. So for me, like those are the biggest things that a city can take the initiative to do, is to go and unfuck our zoning code. And that's how we can deliver better, more broader or more variety of housing options.
You know, I did not have this on my bingo card for tonight. Thank you so much. Everything you said was golden. I think Nicole Rodriguez, if you're still in chat, I think we need to get on making Unfuck Our Zoning Code 2026 hats and shirts. But thank you so much. And actually, you know, there's a lot of things I want to touch on. One of those, though, before we get into a question someone submitted, is, you know, you mentioning like folks in the community also being developers within their own community. This kind of reminds me of like some of the things that sort of housing policies have led to in places like Greece, in Turkey as well, where folks are like almost building up in a way, but like in a very unique and like innovative way, but it's just multiple generations of like the same family. If that makes sense. Anyway, we can talk about that much more another time, but thank you for that. We do have a question from Rocky. So the question is, as a preface, outside of our current confluence of social and political issues, as an instructor, educator, and architecture, I feel at the periphery of the housing space, but central to its advancement is prototyping. Developing new typologies is critical to adapting suburban fabrics into their next phase of gentle density. How do we convince the city of Phoenix to think more innovatively about new neighborhood typologies of menacing middle housing? If any of our panelists want to take that one.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's give people the freedom to do things with their property, within reasonable guidelines. I think there's certain restrictions that probably make sense. You could put a height limit, and you could have you kind of pick your bulk regulation of choice. But I like floor area ratio is one way to to govern density on a lot. But I would as a someone who's concerned about housing supply and I certainly see density as really important for our future. I would be looking for fairly loose controls there, but I would say have a few kind of common sense bulk regulations in your zoning code, and that then let people innovate and do things that are going to benefit themselves and the city. I think I think it's a little bit we've gotten a little too far into the weeds, kind of a controlling mindset in our zoning code and in regulation and city regulation, that I think there's a sense of wanting to kind of fine tune and add kind of layered regulation on code on top of code, and that has not really served the best interests of I think of our city. And so the direction I would go is to that question is let's just kind of let's put in place some reasonable controls, and then let let people innovate and build build as they see fit.
Yeah. All great points, Will. I think if anybody else has a question, make sure to type in chat. If you don't, I also a couple questions of my own. Um, I kind of wanted to, and I guess if we're waiting for other folks to maybe ask their questions, I do have one. This kind of could be for either of you. Um, you know, Phoenix complied with HB 2721, right, but stayed within that minimum requirement, right, 1 mile. While Tucson and Flagstaff, again, shout out Tucson, Flagstaff, went citywide. So, what would it take for Phoenix to be bolder? And like, what's sort of standing in the way, right? At some point, it can't just be another study, right? You can't just keep relying on delaying tactics like that. At some point, decisions have to be made, or not made, right? That itself is a decision. Any thoughts on that? And maybe throw in maybe how we can, some of these issues might be addressed if we can actually tackle it, not just at the policymaking level with, say, a mayor and council, but also maybe at like the department level, like just trying to convince the actual sort of mechanics within the bureaucracy to help move things forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in here first. I think what it's going to take is a brand new council to really be bolder. I mean, I laugh, but truly, I think that part of the work is making sure that we are electing officials that are supportive of all types of housing choices and that truly listen to renters as opposed to just homeowners, because homeowners already have a home, they already have right that path. And we're not really listening as much to renters when we are out campaigning and right to run for office and building our platform and all the things. I think, from that side, I think like the community really has the power to push the current council, right? Like I think communities organizing themselves into like, hey, we want to go push this, we want to talk to you about it. This is what we need, like this is what we want to see, point to other cities that are doing those things. And I think like for the staff side, um, can we connect like local staff with staff in other cities that have made bold changes and get them to talk to each other, just like electeds talk to each other in other states, right? Like I reach out to other pro-housing electeds in different cities. How can I also be like a bridge to connect staff to staff, where there is also that relationship that develops and they can share firsthand, like what was the process, what can they do? And like that's a more peer, right? I think that might be helpful.
That's really good. Yeah, you actually kind of just sold the very idea of the Phoenix Housing Lab in a way to kind of get folks out there to get the discussions going and sort of try to incentivize this sort of collaborative nature. There's a comment.
Yeah, I guess to sort of echo Councilwoman Hernandez, I think what we saw in terms of the community outreach or community attendance, I guess, at the council meetings when they were considering City of Phoenix considering the middle housing question. I think if I really encourage everyone on this call and maybe watching the video to get involved. I think the dynamics, the kind of almost the psychology on new development and housing is stacked against us. The real benefits are kind of diffused. We all benefit from, a more stable housing market that prices lower, but the projects changes are concentrated in certain, oftentimes in certain neighborhoods, right? And so those people, feel that the sky is falling and they all get together and go to council. And so the kind of the fear of change, and negative feelings often motivate people more than, maybe a positive. So while the vast majority or a large majority, supports new housing, and I think studies, back that up and polling, people support, stable housing market and new construction. What the council actually ends up seeing, is a bunch of people in white shirts, opposing middle housing. I will say, Urban Phoenix Project and Open and others did a fantastic job, turning people out, the pro housing voice, back in October and November, I think it was. So I do think we did, kind of turn the tables a bit on the kind of not in my backyard kind of fear-based crew. I think a lot of those people, I think are going to end up on our side. I think we need to keep building friendships and alliances and coalition building. And I think a lot of people just kind of want to do what they think is best, and maybe they hear their neighbor sharing a fear-based argument about something, and that might turn them out against housing. But I think we can win a lot of those people over. But it's a conversation by conversation, and but I would encourage people, we need to get involved, because like I said, people are oftentimes more motivated in fear and in opposition than they are in support. And so that's Urban Phoenix Project, Forest Valley Urban Action Alliance, Open, Organized Power in Numbers, and so many great groups that are kind of part of the coalition.
Really good point, Will. And I think actually is a good segue. I think this could be a good question for either of you, but I think maybe Councilwoman Hernandez, we have a question in the chat. So what's the best way for constituents to help drive sort of these middle housing initiatives, right? Love that like this. Sorry, I'm having a struggle. When I'm done with work, my brain stops working. Would love to see, affect change that could create a more walkable city and better overall connected community that a lot of Phoenix neighborhoods are lacking. So kind of re-upping the question, what do you think would be the best way for constituents to help drive these middle housing initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think first I would say everybody that is here in this meeting, do you know who your council member is? If you don't, you should know who your council member is, because we all host events in the communities around different topics, or we are attending different events and all of that. So it's like I personally host, yeah, and your legislators. Do you know who your legislators are? Because they are also hosting events in the community, right? Like I know like Senator Ortiz has town halls. I personally do Café con Ana twice a month throughout the district. But if they're holding events, right? Like if your elected representatives at every level of government is holding an event, attend the event and submit a question or call their office and request the meeting. Like it can seem, and I know it can seem intimidating. But that's how you can start building that connection and that relationship with your elected representative, because they should know who you are, right? And you are a constituent and your voice matters. So I think like that is a really good way, right? Like if you can't do that, you can attend subcommittee meetings. I serve on the Community Service and Education Committee, which is where housing for the city of Phoenix, a lot of housing policy goes through that subcommittee, and we meet on the last Wednesday of every month. So you can always attend a community service and education subcommittee meeting. If you can't come in, and I know it's very inconvenient for the working folks because it's at 10:30 in the morning or at 10 in the morning. But you can watch online, you can call in, you can leave a comment online. So there's a lot of ways for you to really get involved and send your feedback. At the state level, right? You can send an email to your legislator and asking like, hey, this is the type of policy I support. This is what I would like to see in my community. But I mean, reach out to your elected representatives, and it doesn't always work, but I think like as you reach out more, you really do start building that relationship with your elected representative. And I think that's part of the longer strategy that we all need to recognize, is that we do need those relationships with other elected officials, with our elected representatives, right? And that's a way to build that.
Really awesome. And I think if I can just add a little bit onto that, I think part of how sort of constituents can help sort of in another realm, and it's kind of an indirect way of kind of getting to that same thing of applying pressure and getting involved in organizations, is like in your own life, in the people that you're talking to. I think if you asked my sisters who are in this chat, thank you so much, about like housing and urbanism and walkability and all that jazz, I think they're generally kind of like agnostic. But when I got involved in this advocacy, I could not shut up about it. I still can. And like even when we would drive around the city, I would say, "You see that? That's what annoys the hell out of me because it's doing this X, Y, Z." And oh, you see this empty plot of land? Why do you think we see all these empty squares of land? Right?
Yes.
I sound like a
Okay.
madman.
My siblings, I think, are tired of, I know my sister, she's like, can you shut up about housing for a minute? And I'm like, no, absolutely not. But yeah, like we need to also talk to our own inner circles, like our friends and family. Like we should never stop talking about policy, right? Because like everything is based on everything that impacts our life is based on a policy choice. And that actually reminded me the other way you can get involved is plug in with the groups that are doing the work because they probably already have some sort of idea. So like Open, Ray, and UPP have different events at different times, but there's always campaigns going that if you plug into these groups, they can also be a great starting ground or starting point for how to get involved into pushing policy, you know, through the city and through different levels of government. But yeah, like if you're with your friends, like having some beers, like talk about some zoning codes or
Oh,
start a book club with your friends, right? And like there's a bunch of books that we can all read about zoning codes and all of the things housing. So, we can do that too.
right. Like, I had a good friend. I just could not break through to him. And I said, look, I want to be able to go out and get as drunk as possible and be able to go do that to and from home without having to be incentivized to drive a car or even a Lyft. Like if I can take public transportation or if I was in a walkable neighborhood, I could do that. Um, and just to be able to just have fun, like actually live life in this way without having to incorporate like the logistics of getting there to and from. Um, and that's what won him over. So you do whatever you can in whatever way you can. Um, if so, thank you for that. And if anybody has any other questions,
There's a good question from Anthony here
oh, thank
in
you.
the chat.
Oh, awesome. How do we get the city to fund a co-working and co-housing space near light rail? Was that the one? That might be good for Will, or maybe we
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the first step is legalize it. I think that's should be the first step. Most housing other than, large lot, suburban style single family is, currently banned in our exclusionary zoning codes. And that's pretty much across the board, in the valley and state and country. So that's kind of the baseline step. There's a lot of things, obviously there's a lot of nuance, beyond that. In terms of other barriers to housing being constructed, labor costs and supply chain issues. But I think from my standpoint as an advocate, that if it's not legal, that is going to be a problem. We talk a lot about the structural kind of long term market imbalance of not having enough housing supply, and that drives prices up. But there's I think a lot of people see the new construction, they see the pricing, say of a new, townhome project, and they might wonder, okay, how is that actually helping, folks at the lower end of, income levels? And there's a lot of emerging information kind of studies coming through. One in Colorado that my organization Sweep is a part of. That's showing actually the benefits go up and down kind of the income class, and so as new construction, kind of draws people to, kind of the new shiny apartment, draws people in, it's creating space throughout the entire kind of ecosystem of housing choices for people. And so actually the benefits actually amplify as you go down the affordability kind of range, is what Sweep is finding. That like the Class C apartments actually become substantially cheaper as a result of more construction, of new construction, even if it's expensive housing. But all that being said, there is still, people that are right on the edge of homelessness today. They're right on that edge, and those people, need a solution right away. And that's where, social housing, and we need to be looking at, state light tech. I mean, there's a lot of things that we don't have today in Arizona that we need to be looking at. There's some great solutions, kind of the Montgomery County, Maryland model, but it basically creates you start with they use bond money, so it's public dollars, but it created a revolving loan fund where they provide upfront. A grant to a project, or it's a loan to a project at its most expensive phase during the construction loan. And that, instead of having to go get a, high interest loan, the developer is able to use that low interest money from the county. And that alone is enough to allow for the developer on the back end to offer a certain percentage, a substantial percentage of their project as income restricted. And the developer, the project itself, is still, yielding the same, returns for the developer, and so allows that developer to go build the next project. It doesn't kind of tax the people, in the building. Some of our, kind of affordable housing structures, kind of tax the non-affordable units in order to make the affordable units, cheaper. It avoids that problem. So, some great solutions. So I'd say, I think we need to be, as a kind of housing movement, thinking about both fixing the kind of the structural problem and also the here and now, people that are right on the verge of homelessness.
Absolutely. Thank you, Will. So final question of the night. Annalise, thank you for the question I missed. Is there a genuine awareness amongst Phoenix planning staff regarding how a lot of seemingly mundane policies hold back housing supply and walkability, like those mentioned above? Is there any way the council can create like a sense of urgency to change them among staff?
So that's a great question. And so I think yes and no, right? Like, yes, there's staff that understand like what the barriers are. In order to get council to create that sense of urgency, we need 5 votes. And so even if we have staff that understands it, if the majority of council this is not a priority for them, it's going to be really hard to create that sense of urgency. So that's a lot of the work that's ahead of us. And really for a lot of you is like, how do we move more of the council members in Phoenix to really take up housing as a priority through these measures, so we can actually make some substantial changes to our policies.
I think that's a good point about, politics is, personal. And so that goes for the politicians as well, right? They need to be able to feel it, that pressure to act, to be responsive, right? So I think we are close to time. I just kind of want to close with some final remarks. First, unfuck our zoning code 2026. Thank you so much to our speakers tonight, Will, Anna, and Andrea. Thank you all for joining us for this first Phoenix Housing Lab session. We really hope, tonight gave you kind of a clear picture of what missing middle housing is, why it matters for Phoenix, kind of the tools we have to move forward, and that, with an evidence-based approach that coupled with an understanding of like our specific circumstances here in Phoenix, and taking into account, the future needs of the community, but also their lived experiences, we can come away with, solutions to these major challenges. Kind of speaking to solutions, I loved all the solutions everybody was typing in chat. Hopefully you can kind of like send that my way. We can maybe use some of those for future webinars. And just a couple final closing things. A couple things to put on your calendar. Our next Phoenix Housing Lab is Thursday, May 28th at 6 p.m. And if you want to get more involved with Urban Phoenix Project, our next volunteer meeting is Tuesday, May 5th. So next week, May 5th at 5:30 p.m. We have a great guest speaker. I will not tell you who it is. You will have to find out who it is by attending. You can sign up and learn more at urbanphoenixproject.org. Thank you all, and we will see you next month. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Stephen.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Alcon.
everybody.
Take care, y'all.